Hey, vigilantes. So the Fed says we're wrong about a hard landing. They say the market isn't going to crash. We're not going to have a recession. But has the Fed ever been wrong, guys?
Never.
Maybe it's more like, has it ever been right?
Yeah.
So I'm here with Mike and Josh, two of our brightest young analysts. Everyone knows who we are. So let's just get right into it. So, guys, in lay terms, what the hell is a soft landing? And let me just before we do that, I want to say this is what we're going to refute today. We're going to refute this idea of a soft landing, and we want to arm you with the ability to be able to see when it is presented to you why it's a load of crap. So, in lay terms, guys, what is a soft landing? What the hell is it, and why do we care about it at all?
Well, it's the idea that the Fed can raise rates to lower inflation without causing a crash, right? Or a recession. In their words, so they can slow down the economy, which it blames for the increase in inflation to begin with. Another term that they throw out that I like is immaculate disinflation. So
What does that mean? What does that mean, Mike?
well, it means that that they can get rid of the inflation, immaculately. It's a religious reference, as in the Fed can do no sin, right?
We could bring down the inflation problem, which we didn't cause, and
Right.
It won't hurt a single soul. No.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
So,
I've got
Josh, do you agree with that definition of what a
Yeah,
soft landing?
yeah, bringing down inflation without dipping the economy into a recession is, yeah.
Mhm. So why do we care about this at all, right? Why do we care? Because I predicted that the markets are going to crash. Well, there's one good reason, right?
well, it's the idea of a soft landing, I think, is a myth in itself. And I think if we understand, how the effects of the Fed's policy and intervening into the markets, this idea that it can intervene again and not cause problems, it doesn't make any sense.
True, but why do we care about this topic? Why should our viewers continue to watch what we're going to have to say about this, for instance?
I think it could have a large impact on their lives, depending on their financial situation and their work and their investments. Yeah, all three of those are going to be affected.
Right. So, as Mike was saying, in order to refute this myth, we want to help you understand how the economy actually works. Okay, so surprisingly few people know how it does, and honestly, if you haven't read any of the Austrian school work, you really don't. You don't know how the economy works. I'm sorry to tell you the bad news, but you don't, right? So what is an economy? We hear this term, the economy. What is it?
Well,
What is the average? Sorry, Mike.
yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say, it's in very simple terms, it's all the economic activity within a society. But if you really want to get into what is economic activity, it's kind of like, a society is an organization. Society is just a whole bunch of individuals, kind of working together to organize scarce labor and capital, with the intent of satisfying our needs and our wants, both now and in the future. So, the cooperation between all these individuals is economics, and the economy is just, some of all that activity. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, you said something I think that drew my attention is that labor and capital is scarce.
Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah, no, it is.
No, really.
No, and it's
Yeah.
like, and
No, but that's exactly. I mean, I'm not making fun of you. I mean, that's exactly true. It is scarce, and that's what people don't understand is you can have. There's only two ways you could direct production. You could direct production from the top down, or from the bottom up, right? And when you're doing that, you're allocating a scarce amount of labor and capital to the production of things that are also scarce. That's why that's why they have value to us, right?
yeah, and that's what I think, economics is. That's what the economy is doing. It's all those. It's how are we organizing those
So this,
things.
yeah, and so the standard definition, the dictionary definition is if you ask, if you punch in the word economy, it'll spit out the definition that it's the wealth or resources of a nation. It's what my dictionary gave me. Okay.
The wealth of
Um,
resources.
so the wealth or resources of a region is the economy, right? So presumably, economic growth would constitute growth in the wealth or resources of a region. Okay. But how do you grow wealth? What is it? Is it just like a bunch of stuff?
And it's anything that I think has value, that it satisfies a human need, either now or in the future.
Right, right. So can you think of anything that was would have been considered wealth or a good today, that is considered a wealth or good today, that might not have been in the past?
Oh yeah, for
You know,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of things.
I mean, oil wasn't always an economic good, right? It laid there under the sands in Saudi Arabia and wherever else in America and in Russia and Canada for, I mean, millions of years, and thousands of human years before humans really attached any real value to it. I mean, it was used in small applications here or there before the 18th century, but it really wasn't scarce. And you'd see it, you'd use it for whatever. You'd throw it on maybe on your arrow, or whatever, and but it wasn't scarce, right? But eventually became a good, and it became increasingly scarce, something that consumers valued. So we built machines to find it, to produce it, but not just for the next day, for many years going forward, right? Because this is where I want to sort of distinguish from the standard definition of the economy is that one economist put it this way, said that, and quoting Menger, which is the founder of the Austrian school, said, precaution and provision in relation to wants and needs represent the core of the economy. So people are concerned for the satisfaction of their needs, and thus also about providing for their future needs and wants. Okay. So the quote, provision for future needs, unquote, quoting Menger in Principles, represents the essence of the economy. Okay. So I was trying to talk slowly so that it absorb what I'm saying. So, as you said earlier, society is essentially economic cooperation, right? So that's what an economy is. We cooperate to build things, not just for the present, but for the future.
Yeah.
Right. So if that's what an economy is, what's growth? What then is growth? Is growth just, if we is growth just an increase in any old pile of goods? if we say we ran a command style economy and told everyone to produce just TVs, and if the next year we produce more TVs than last year, is that growth?
No, it's not growth. Unless that's the only thing humans wanted and needed, then sure, it's growth. But it's all about, you know, what society needs, society wants. And so the economy is growing if more and more of those needs are being met.
Right. I mean, that's what Menger means, right? In the provision for future needs, whose needs? Obviously, the consumer's needs.
Yeah,
Right?
society as a whole.
Not saying the needs of the kings or the needs of the politicians. You're saying
No.
the people.
Yeah.
You know, every person, in economic terms, every individual is both a producer and a consumer. Right? Unless they don't work, then they're just a consumer. But instead, everybody, every individual, that is part of the economy, that isn't, say, cancer on it, is both a producer and a consumer. Right? Because just the production of more TVs or more stuff, isn't obviously what is considered. And it might sound absurd to even talk about it this way, but really, when they talk about stimulating aggregate demand and creating jobs for the sake of creating jobs, that's what they're doing. That's what they believe. They believe that they can just by economic activity alone is a good enough measure of growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Or the MMT people arguing that the more debt we have is great because it means that we spent more money, so it doesn't matter what the money's been spent on, it's good. We're causing growth.
Right. Right. So we've established that in an unhampered free market system, production is going to be guided by consumer wants and needs, right?
Yes.
So, and what I like to say is that the consumer is the North Star for capitalists and entrepreneurs. And the mechanism for following the North Star is the profit and loss system. Because, I mean, the emergence of money and money prices, I mean, it's a different world than it was a few hundred years ago. I mean, the emergence of money and money prices for goods, that transformed everything itself, right? It allowed us to calculate how to use things efficiently. Profits only occur in a free market if the producers are meeting those consumer wants, right? If they're not, you're not going to sell your good. And if losses occur, that means you're not meeting consumer wants and needs. And so then you fold up that business and the capital and labor gets reallocated by a smarter entrepreneur or by the same one if he's learned from his mistakes to something that consumers want, right? So this is the invisible hand that Adam Smith wrote about, except he didn't understand it the way that Ludwig von Mises understood it. Right? In an economy, you are contributing value and wealth if you're making a profit. Growth is apparent when consumers are getting more and more stuff, or more and more choices, not just more and more stuff, more and more choices, and they can buy more and more of the things they want with the labor they sell, right? So their standard of living rises. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, fundamentally, it's like taking a farmer in a small town, and as soon as they start to specialize, everyone gets more of kind of everything that each person can produce in their individual field.
Well, the Marxists really disagreed with that specialization angle, right? The Marxists believe that specialization is sort of the root of evil of mankind. It separates us from our goods, right? The man who specializes in building screws is alienated from the production of all these other goods that he needs and wants. So, in a Marxist view, the guy should be a generalist, be good at producing everything rather than specializing.
Well, I think the individual is the one who should be making that decision. They want to be a
Absolutely.
generalist or they want to be a specialist.
No, absolutely. That's where the Marxists fail to. But you're right. It's just, if that's the case, why do you have to force somebody to be a generalist?
Like you said before, it's about increasing the choices to the consumer,
Well,
and choices that that they are actually interested in, and satisfying needs and wants that they actually have, so that they can free up their time, so they're not spending all of their labor, just covering the basics of living. If that stuff is covered and then other things are covered and then they have options to explore their passions or their interests, they have the choice to specialize into something, or maybe they want to be a generalist and know a little bit of everything. It's like
sure.
advancing an economy in that way, it really increases freedom overall for everyone, as well as the standard of living.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's right. I agree. How can we know if you're making a profit if you have a very powerful organization manipulating prices and interest rates?
That's the trouble, right? It's like the manipulation of interest rates, especially the prices too. It distorts many of the economic signals that businesses or entrepreneurs look at. When calculating, if a certain endeavor or business idea is even worth executing. That they need to calculate if it's worth the effort, right? And if you're distorting these key signals, it can kind of trick businesses into putting their scarce resources and labor into the wrong avenues. And
Right.
and the longer that these distortions are allowed to have, the more errors can occur. And
Correct. Yeah.
and it doesn't just undermine. It also impedes, I think, if entrepreneurs are making bad decisions, right? Any bad decision that's being made, because of these distortions and key economic signals, it's really impeding other wealth generating activities that could be going on, because it's drawing down on that same pool of wealth, right? But it's being put into areas that society doesn't actually want or need.
Yeah, I guess we could have also uh, dealing with that and dealing with a previous issue, we could also refer to the broken window fallacy that Bastiat wrote about, which is, how often the Keynesians and central planners will argue that that war is good for the economy because
Yeah.
because
Bullshit.
right, but their argument is that that war is good for the economy because it boosts spending. I mean, we know what's wrong with that.
It'd be like the same thing as saying, then we should just hire a bunch of people to dig holes, and then we should hire a bunch of other people to fill those holes back in.
Right, exactly. But also, there's another point in that what's happening is that if you go around breaking all the windows, sure, you're going to create a boom for the window makers, right?
Yeah.
But
Or makes a boom for the, military industrial complex.
right, but the capital and labor that you devote to fixing all those windows could have been devoted to making more hamburgers or more
Yeah.
more suits or more whatever that people actually needed, but
Right.
now they don't get because we have to fix the windows, right?
And it goes back to the
Uh,
idea that there's scarce labor and resources. It's not like there's an infinite supply. So if
correct.
it's going over to the broken windows, or it's going to war, or digging these pointless holes, it's not going somewhere else. It's just
Right,
matter of fact.
right. So could we say that whenever they intervene in money and prices and interest rates, they're generally diverting production from consumer wants?
Yes, generally. I mean, I'm sure sometimes that, something goes right, but it's not it's not the consumer that's directing it anymore. It's like you've taken the I think, to use one of your terms, the Northern Star. It's like you've taken that away. And so without the proper economic signals, you know, it's not the consumer that's now directing where these resources go. And, you know,
Right.
it'll just be a crapshoot if it ends up going somewhere that it should, and it probably won't.
Well, and you actually brought in another argument of Mises's, which is the calculation problem of the state. If it ignores profits and money prices and so forth, right? Is it doesn't know if it's creating value at all. But what we do know is that it's diverting production away from consumer wants, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. If every intervention by the state all it does is it just shifts production away from what consumers want, what happens when the intervention stops? The resources have to get allocated back to where the consumers want, right?
Yeah.
If they allow it.
Right, right. Now that we know what the economy is, okay, we know what growth is, increased standard of living, you know, increased happiness ultimately. What drives growth, guys? Like, okay, so let's help our audience understand what drives growth.
Investment, investment, and you know, and the investment is it's other than it's driven by savings, you know, hopefully real savings, but it can also, you know, fake growth can be driven by fake savings, which is, you know, the manipulation of interest rates. But
Right.
but it is savings and investment that drives growth.
Right. It's not consumer spending.
No.
For
Why not?
growth, we have to increase the with the wealth and resources of the group. So spending is not going to do that, but you have to invest in something productive to get that growth.
Let's rewind a little bit and let's talk about interest rates. Okay, let's just quickly talk about interest rates. What are they, right?
Measurement of savings.
So high rates signal the need for saving, right?
Yeah.
Right.
If there's a lot of savings, then, you know, the rates should be low because there's, you know, we don't need that much. But if the savings pool gets tight, then there'd be more demand for it, and so the interest would pay more.
The reason for low interest rates is a reflection of the want to save, right? A low time preference rate for individuals. A low interest rate will reflect a society where individuals have more that they want to save, right? But it's not like as if they let the savings build up before they invest it, right? It's they save and invest basically all in one scoop, right? Investment is what drives growth, but investment can be driven by voluntary savings or forced savings, which is, I believe, what you were trying to say, right?
Yeah,
right?
fake savings. Yeah.
Right. In the case where you get these forced or fake savings, it's obviously not driven by consumer preferences, right? So it's not like as if consumers are. It doesn't reflect consumer time preference. It doesn't reflect what consumers want. Right? It's driven, but this kind of growth is driven by artificial incentives that ultimately come to rely on a continuation of those artificial incentives, right? Because otherwise, like I said, if you pull the intervention away, what happens is, well, the structure of production, which was oriented in one way, it's got to find its path back to what consumers want. But the creators of the Fed, and we're getting to the soft landing myth here, but the creators of the Fed say that the Federal Reserve System, they created it because the market system is inherently unstable, is volatile. That the free market system, if you leave it alone, it's just going to have booms and busts. It's going to have depressions. It's going to be subject to overproduction or under consumption. And the Fed has to manage all of this, all of these difficulties.
Oh yeah. It's the only one that can. It's the hero.
So what do you guys think of that?
I don't know. It's to me, it's like the classic problem, reaction, solution setup, right? The Fed creates the problem, but then it is the ultimate cause of the booms and the busts, but it will never admit to it, And then when the inevitable reaction comes, it proposes a solution, which is actually the same thing that caused the problem. It's funny how that we still fall for it.
In a free market economy, there's a rolling exchange of business leaders, you know. Schumpeter talked about that. And yeah, so there's companies that go under, maybe whole sectors get hit by a drought, but it's never the whole economy that's under pressure because of one entity making an arbitrary decision.
Right, because
Right?
the industry that's becoming obsolete is becoming obsolete because a new one is arising.
Yeah.
It's not as if it becomes obsolete in a vacuum, right? There's a dynamic process that's going on. Correct. I believe that that's the case, right? You guys know that the Austrian school is the only school that argues that that free market capitalism is not inherently unstable. Not that it's not changing. It's dynamic.
Yeah.
But it's not systemically unstable in the sense that the Fed guys try to argue. And
if anything, it's self-regulating. It doesn't need management. That's the beauty of it.
right, right. And so it's the Fed's interference in prices and interest rates that, as you said, Mike, caused the financial and economic instability in the first place.
Yeah.
It's
And
their
then
interference.
they use that to justify their very existence, right? And people are still buying that shit.
So, given this, how can the institution that causes the instability be the solution to the instability? How does it create a soft landing if it's diverted production unsustainably away from what consumers want?
Yeah. I mean,
it cannot. It does not have the power to do that. That's for sure.
So this obviously is, we're trying to pierce through the armor of all the bullshit propaganda out there, and I hope we're doing it because you should at this point start to see, well, soft landing is pretty much impossible if you got this institution that's ignoring consumer wants and just going about its business itself, and then creating the inflation that it purports to be fighting. And it's what a mess, and it really is a mess, right? So this is in part why their record of achieving a soft landing is so terrible, right? Out of 21, I think it's 21, is it 21 or 23 rate hikes since 1913, since their inception? I think only one of them is a success, and that was in 94, 95. They claim,
success.
yeah, I think that the soft landers will claim that there's a couple others, but I believe that those are those fall in our category because it's just that it took a little more time for the hard landing to occur in those instances.
Yeah,
but
that's kind of some people might now even argue that the Fed has achieved a soft landing, or they're convinced that it's on the cusp of doing it. And
right.
We could even speculate that in the future, let's say we do get a hard landing in 6 months from now, a major recession. History books might rewrite history now as saying that no, the Fed achieved the soft landing. Just it's all part of this psyop, right? That the Fed that can fix the problems. Because there's a wave of people right now that would look at the inflation coming down, the job market being strong, the stock market being high, as proof the Fed has succeeded.
Right. So that brings us to a point. So at what point can you say that you've succeeded? Is there a point at which we can say, well, I mean, is it when inflation comes down to what's their target, 2%?
2%.
On their manipulated bullshit statistics. So when it comes down to when they say it come down to 2%,
I think what everyone's looking for is that the inflation comes to 2%, and then rates normalize. But what is normal? Like, I think people think that near zero interest rates is normal. It's like, because that's what's needed to even possibly sustain this fake growth that we're in right now.
Right. Well, so you're adding two conditions. You're saying they have to defeat inflation and rates have to come down,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. Because those, to me, those are two separate things. And you know, as I've argued in my newsletters that bringing the inflation rate down to 2% doesn't necessarily mean they can bring the rate down as well, right?
Yeah, no.
For
We'll see
reasons I
that
don't
we'll
want
see
to.
that they can't. We'll see that they can't.
Right, right. Um, the while we're on that topic though, so you know, I think this is the interesting part is because at the moment we can still see the trend in economic activity, even activity, never let profits, you know, we want to talk about the real stuff, you know, profits peaked in 2021, right? Pretty much they went down, they're up a little bit um above the 21 peak, I think on a quarterly basis, but I'm not even sure about that. But you know, for if you zoom out a little bit, basically the profits have peaked 2 years ago, right? We can see that the generally the rate of job growth has slowed. We can see generally that that GDP, even their measure of economic growth, has slowed. Um, so far, there's been continued slowing. Has there been any liftoff at all?
Just in stocks.
Just stocks, yeah.
Yeah, just stocks, right? So, which are basically expectations, right? But
No, I mean, there's so many signs like the consumer is weak. How many major retailers are coming out and they're saying that they're missing sales expectations because the consumer is weak. They're only spending their money on essential things. We keep hearing personal debt levels exceeding. There's these new
right,
buy now, pay later loans that we can't even track.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, for sure. And no, I agree. And so that to my point is, well, if you're going to achieve success in a soft landing, don't you want it to, isn't it something that you should have left behind? Shouldn't it be like, okay, um, now that we're growing again, we can say we've achieved a soft landing, right?
yeah. So it's like you got to land the plane, get the passengers off, reboard, and then take off again.
Right, right. Then you can say we hit a soft landing, but as long as you're coming down still, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You haven't even hit the runway necessarily, right? Yeah, we haven't because let's say the runway is their inflation target.
Yeah, no, they
So
haven't.
you haven't even hit the runway and you're claiming successful soft landing. Well, why would you do that as a pilot? You'd want to calm everybody,
Yeah.
assuage everybody's fears, you
Soft
know,
landing is
manage.
a psyop. That's what it is. It's a freaking psyop to convince
Right,
everyone that the Fed is still in control, that it has
right,
things under control, and that we need it to be managing this.
right. You know, like, and so maybe we can post some articles from past cycles too, and it's common, right? Just before a crash, they're always claiming a victory.
2007. There's dozens of headlines, praising the Fed, saying that they either achieved a soft landing or they're on track for one. It's just around the corner.
Yeah,
Very similar to
right.
what we see now.
Yeah,
These soft landing headlines that have been in the news this time around have been going on for over a year and a half. Is that this
right,
goalpost just keeps getting moved further and further and further and further back. Just like you said, the plane's coming down, but it's never actually landing. And it's certainly
right.
not getting reboarded and about to take off again.
Yeah. So, and you know, not everybody understands how the economy really works, especially at the Fed. They would probably be well advised to watch this video, but then again, they would probably just the smart ones would probably just watch this video to learn how they can manipulate everybody's expectations, right?
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, I think the dumb ones they believe that they believe in what the Fed is doing. They believe that the free market system is inherently unstable, that it needs this management. They believe that the key to growth is consumer spending. They believe that the key to growth is making sure the consumer is confident. So that's why these surveys of consumer confidence, right? So and that's really what, you know, when the Fed is perpetuating its soft landing myth, that's what it's really aiming at. Consumer confidence is aiming at that. It's aiming at preventing investors from selling their stocks. It's aiming at delaying the adjustment process, right?
Yeah.
So,
Kicking the can down the road. That's
right,
the goal, as far as possible.
which is why, even though they've been running a deflation policy for 2 years now, it hasn't really kicked in yet. This is why the lag has probably been as big as they have, because they're deliberately trying to offset it with their rhetoric.
Yeah.
Right?
It seems like it seems like they would just love something to occur that had nothing to do with them. You know, like a war or another pandemic or something that, you know, basically let it, you know, will be blamed. That's what will be the blame for why things fall apart. And it won't be, no fingers will be pointed at the Fed. And then they'll be able to play this game all over again.
Yeah,
You know, justify their existence, continue to justify their existence. It seems like it seems like they're working at all costs to avoid, you know, a hard landing that gets pinned on them. Seems like
it's
that's
like Rothbard had a good quote on that once in one of his books. He wrote about how it's the central banker is like the bank robber who finishes robbing a bank, gets out, the bells are ringing, and he's running down the street and he's pointing across the street to the other guy, "Stop, thief!"
Yeah.
Diverting everybody's attention to that guy and blaming it on that guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, uh, you know, the thing, not to beleaguer the point too much, but um, the thing about measuring growth by in terms of consumer spending, aside from everything else we've talked about, is that you don't really know if, rather as opposed to measuring it by investment and production, you don't really know if consumers are spending out of their new wealth, that new wealth being created, and we're getting wealthier. So as people like Ed Yardini like to say, is because we're getting wealthier, even though he measures his the wealth in stock, the value of financial claims and so forth, because we're getting wealthier, uh, um, then if you measure consumer spending, that's what it refers to. So the average person will look at the expansion in consumer spending and say, well, I guess we're getting wealthier. So the growth in consumer spending for that person reflects growth, but you don't know what if, because of the artificial incentives, instead of spending new wealth, we're spending our savings, right? Because we're miscalculating the effects of inflation, for example. I mean, the problem with forced savings and artificial growth is that because it bypasses consumer wants, you might as well, when you're stimulating top down, when you're stimulating spending, you might as well be producing nothing but TVs. Okay? So the stuff that's being produced under the artificial incentives is not, it's not aligned with consumer preferences. It bypasses them. So when that policy has to be abandoned because, for instance, it creates inflation, which they say it doesn't, they blame on other things, then when they have to abandon the policy in the name of fighting this external evil inflation caused by capitalists, the activities that were supported under the artificial policy have to be liquidated, right? So the unsound boom, in other words, it produces a bunch of stuff that isn't really wealth. But while it's being produced, the labor and capital producing it can't produce what is more urgently needed.
Exactly.
Until the North Star illuminates that path again. What have we learned?
Resources, labor, and capital are scarce.
And hopefully we've learned that the soft landing myth is a myth.
Yeah.
It's not only a historically unprecedented type of achievement. It's a myth. If you understand how the economy works, all it is just a psyop, as Mike said.
Yeah.
Um,
The
so
head- it's there to
given
justify
that-
the Fed's existence. It's there to justify further intervention.
right. So given that the post 2008 bull market in stocks, I always hesitate to call the whole stretch of one bull market, but it pretty much you could. Given that the post 2008 bull market in financial claims and the supposed economic expansion since 2008, okay, given that those things were built on one of history's most aggressive inflation in money and debt, and the all but annihilation of interest rates, which you've learned has purpose. How can the Fed achieve a soft landing in this insane of a bull market instances through history?
The central bank has really just painted themselves into a corner. Really kind of stuck at this point in time. You know, if they raise interest rates from here, it most certainly will cause the recession that they're trying to avoid. And if they lower interest rates, it'll just undermine.
I mean, they can
everything
only,
they've done.
while they're raising interest rates, they can only talk entrepreneurs out of liquidating their unproductive assets for so long before they finally have to, right?
Yep.
Well, I hope we did a good job in exploding this myth that seems to make the headlines every too frequently. Let's put it that way.
Usually
do you guys have any-
just before a hard landing.
It's like an indicator. It's almost an indicator.
It is, really.
It's almost an indicator. Yeah. Actually, you're probably right. It is a good indicator. Right. So let's leave it on that note. Unless you guys have anything to add.
No.
Right on. So over and out, vigilantes. I happy to serve and good trading. Peace.